Good morning. I'm Michael on behalf of the Affirming Ministry Committee. October, not much left of the month of October, but still timely. October is LGBTQIA History Month, which is recognized annually in Canada and other countries. LGBTQIA History Month is a month-long celebration of the remarkable and unique history of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer community, as well as the contribution of the civil rights movements to the advancement of gay rights in Canada. In Canada, October is the month when we mark the end of state-sponsored discrimination of 2S LGBTQIA military personnel and federal public servants by the Canadian federal government between the 1950s and the mid-1990s, which came to be known as the LGBT Purge. And I will talk more about the LGBT Purge in just a minute. I would like to take us back in time to the 1960s through to the 1990s. Protests in the 1960s and 1970s called for an end to discrimination, while police raids on gay bathhouses in the 1980s sparked new rounds of activism. The civil service, military, and RCMP banned gay employees even after the criminal code was changed in 1969 to decriminalize homosexual acts performed in private between consenting adults. Laws and policies that punished people for homosexuality were common in Canada until the 1990s. I would like to highlight one of the most troubling movements or moments in LGBTQIA+ history in Canada, and that is the LGBT Purge. The LGBT Purge was the systematic identification and expulsion of queer members of the military, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the civil service by the Government of Canada. The LGBT Purge in Canada was influenced by the US version of the Purge, which came before what happened in Canada, and it was known as the Lavender Scare, which can be traced back to the communist witch hunt at the start of the Cold War. There was a fear in the United States government that homosexuals could easily be recruited or blackmailed by communists. An investigation at the time never found one example of a homosexual American being blackmailed into revealing state secrets. Between the 1950s and mid-1990s, 2S LGBTQIA+ members of the Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP, and the Federal Public Service were systematically discriminated against, harassed, and often fired as a matter of policy and sanctioned practice. In what came to be known as the LGBT Purge, people were followed, interrogated, abused, and traumatized by their own government. The LGBT Purge was implemented at the highest levels of the Government of Canada and was carried out with callous disregard for the dignity, privacy, and humanity of its victims. With its roots in the Cold War, the Canadian government LGBT Purge continued for over 40 years. An estimated 9,000 lives were devastated over those years. And the irreparable psychological trauma continues to this day. The careers and self-esteem of a generation of LGBT people were destroyed. Victims were denied benefits, severance, pensions, and opportunities for promotion if they managed to keep their jobs. This shameful period in Canadian history also resulted in suicide, HIV, fear, depression, PTSD, addiction, disownment, criminalization, rejection, isolation, erasure, and many other enduring and painful experiences. 2S LGBTQIA Canadians led political and legal campaigns to dismantle the purge and to ensure protection under Canadian human rights law. One of those human rights activists fighting for social justice was Canadian Armed Forces veteran Michelle Douglas, who served as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces from 1986 to 1989. Her superiors forced Michelle to undergo intense interrogations about her sexual orientation. She eventually was pressured to disclose the truth and was demoted and discharged from the Canadian Armed Forces in 1989 under the military's LGBT purge. She launched a landmark legal challenge against the military's discriminatory policies against LGBT service members that resulted in the ending of Canada's discriminatory policies in the military in 1992. She is now the executive director of the LGBT Purge Fund. In 2016, survivors of the LGBT Purge Fund launched a nationwide class action lawsuit against the Canadian government. A historic settlement was reached in June 2018. It included a global settlement of an amount of $145 million. Up to $110 million was set aside to the payment of damages to LGBT purge victims. The settlement allocated between $15 and $25 million for reconciliation and memorialization measures. Some of the funds from the settlement of the class action lawsuit are being used to build a 2S LGBTQIA national monument in Ottawa, which will be a visible landmark that will recognize generations of 2S LGBTQIA people in Canada and tell the story of those who have been persecuted, abused, dismissed, and marginalized because of who they desire and how they identify. It will acknowledge historic discrimination experienced by 2S LGBTQI communities and the abuse perpetrated by the Canadian state, including the LGBT Purge. A traveling pop-up exhibition entitled Love in a Dangerous Time, Canada's LGBT Purge, is on display at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg. It actually appeared in Regina at the RCP depot when it was traveling throughout Canada. If you would like to learn more about the LGBT Purge, Ken Featherton authored a book, Righting Canada's Wrongs, The LGBT Purge and the Fight for Equal Rights in Canada. And we just so happen to have a copy. It is amazing. I mean, the pictures, the amount of information, I would encourage anybody, if they want to get a better understanding of Canadian history, to read it. It will be on the display wall with other books closer to the welcome desk in the lounge, and eventually it will make its way into the McFall reading room, which is on the left-hand side. Ken Featherington is a retired librarian, storyteller, author, and a children's book reviewer. He was the first children and youth advocate for library services for the Toronto Public Library. He received the title Librarian of the Year, and he's also the author of the picture book Mom and Mom, M-O-M and M-U-M, Are Getting Married. Kathy Greer generously donated a copy of the book, and you will be able to find it in our little library in the McFall Reading Room. This book is part of a 10-volume set, Righting Canada's Wrongs, which have been written by different authors. These books enable readers to see the racism and discrimination that have been embedded in Canadian life for generations. Many groups have been targeted. These books highlight the resilience and resistance of those impacted, including Indigenous peoples, Japanese Canadians, LGBTQIA+ people, and African Canadians.